Have you ever been judged not for who you are, but for how you sound? Imagine walking onto a plane, tired after a long week, only to be met with mockery because of your accent, because your voice carries the rhythm of your roots. What would you do, stay silent, or speak up that day? Dr. Langston Reed, a man of calm strength and quiet dignity, faced that very choice. The flight attendant laughed at the way he spoke, unaware that the man she dismissed was no ordinary passenger, but the new owner of the very airport she worked for. It wasn't just an insult. It was a reflection of something deeper, the way society still measures worth by surface and sound. And what Langston did next would change not only her life, but an entire community. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever swallowed your hurt just to keep your peace, this story will speak to you. Because sometimes, grace makes more noise than anger ever could. Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Heart Stories. And let's begin a journey that will remind you what true dignity sounds like. The airport buzzed with the familiar chaos of early morning departures. Rolling suitcases hummed against polished floors. Announcements echoed through the loudspeakers, and the smell of coffee drifted from the nearby cafe. Dr. Langston Reed adjusted the collar of his dark wool coat, waiting quietly in line to board Flight 214 to Denver. He spoke softly into his phone, his southern drawl warm and measured. "Yes, Mama, I'll call you when I land. Don't worry about me. Just keep that heater on, it's snowing hard out there." The woman behind him smiled faintly. The young flight attendant at the gate, Emily Davenport, did not. Her eyes darted from his face to the first-class boarding pass in his hand. She frowned. "Sir, are you sure this is for first class?" Her voice was polite, but the tone cut sharp like cold glass. Langston looked up, calm as still water. "Yes, ma'am." "Seat 1A, he said with a gentle smile. Emily tilted her head, scanning the ticket again as if it might be fake. Then she forced a brittle smile and stepped aside. "Very well, sir. Enjoy your flight." Langston walked down the jet bridge, his footsteps slow and steady. The light flickered overhead. He had felt this kind of look before, the kind that didn't see him. Only what he wasn't supposed to be. Inside the plane. The cabin was warm and bright. First-class seats glowed under soft golden lights. Langston placed his worn leather bag in the overhead bin and settled by the window. He loved watching the clouds. They always reminded him that everything small below still mattered. Across the aisle, Emily served champagne to a suited businessman. Her smile returned practiced, perfect, but when she turned to Langston, her lips thinned again. "Would you like something to drink?" "Sir." "Yes, ma'am. Just some water. Please." Her eyes flicked downward. "Of course," she said, and turned away before he could finish thanking her. Minutes passed. The water never came. Langston leaned back, silent. He could feel the quiet judgment from 2 rows behind the whisper of passengers noticing, pretending not to. He wasn't angry, not yet. He just wondered how many people had to swallow this kind of small cruelty every day. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and deep. "This is Captain Andre Wells speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 214. Expected arrival in Denver, 10:30 local time." Langston's gaze lifted. He recognized the name. Andre Wells, one of the few black pilots in the airline. He had read about him in Aviation Weekly. A small smile returned to his face. Emily continued down the aisle, serving drinks, chatting with a couple in crisp northern accents. When she passed Langston again, he spoke gently. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could I please have that water now? She gave a little laugh, mock sweet. "Oh, I'm sorry. Sir, guess I forgot with all the fancy requests up here." A man nearby chuckled. Langston's face stayed calm, but something behind his eyes darkened an old, familiar ache. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached for his phone and opened the voice memo app. He pressed record, set it beside him on the armrest, and stared quietly out the window. Outside, snow dusted the runway. Inside, dignity was being tested. Emily whispered to her colleague at the galley, "Can you believe that accent? Sounds like he came straight out of a barn, not a boardroom." Her colleague shrugged. "Uneasy? Maybe don't say that too loud." "Emily!" But she laughed again, unaware of the small blinking red light on Langston's phone. The plane lifted into the sky. Engines roared, seat belts clicked. Clouds swallowed the wings. Langston closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about his mother's voice back home in Alabama. Strong, kind, unwavering. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from," she had told him once, when he was 10. "Your voice carries the soil that raised you. Let it speak for you, not against you." He exhaled, slow. He had lived by those words every day since. Emily moved down the aisle again. "Would you care for lunch, sir?" "Yes, thank you." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "We have grilled salmon or short ribs, but I'm guessing you'd prefer something simpler." The sarcasm sat sharp in her smile. Langston looked at her, quiet for a beat too long. "Short ribs will be fine," he said softly. "I appreciate your service." Her eyes rolled slightly as she turned away. In the cockpit, Captain Wells adjusted the autopilot and sighed. Through the small monitor feed, he had caught part of the exchange. He knew that tone, he had lived it. He hesitated, hand hovering over the intercom button, but professionalism won. He said nothing, only marked the time in his logbook. Back in the cabin, turbulence hit just enough to jolt a glass from Emily's tray. Water splashed onto Langston's sleeve. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. He dabbed at the sleeve with a napkin. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Accidents happen." She muttered under her breath, "Guess they do." Langston's calm unnerved her more than any anger could. As the plane steadied, she turned to her colleague again. "People like him. They think they can just buy their way into class. But you can always tell." The colleague didn't respond this time. She looked away, shame creeping in. Langston reached for his phone and ended the recording. He didn't know what he would do with it yet. He just knew this silence wasn't always peace. Sometimes it was simply the pause before truth began to speak. Outside, the clouds thinned. Below them, the snowy ridges of Colorado came into view sharp, bright, endless. Langston watched them with a look that was half memory, half resolve. He whispered, barely audible, "Let's see how high Grace can fly." As the plane descended toward Silverbridge International Airport, he adjusted his tie. He wasn't just another passenger. He was the man about to become the airport's new owner. But for now, he stayed silent, letting humility write its own beginning. The morning sun filtered through the airplane window as Flight 214 taxied toward its gate. Langston stayed seated while the rest of first class gathered their coats and carry-ons. Emily's forced smile returned when she walked past him. She wanted to move on, to bury that uncomfortable tension under polite phrases and the noise of deplaning passengers. Langston simply nodded. He felt no need for words. Outside, snow fell in slow, lazy flakes that glittered against the glass. He watched them with a quiet sense of distance, almost like he was seeing a different snowfall, one from long ago. His thoughts drifted back to Greenville, Alabama, 30 years earlier. A dirt road wound behind the old wooden house where he grew up. Every evening, the crickets sang under a fading pink sky. His mother, Ruth Reed, would sit on the porch swing, reading aloud from a thin book with worn corners. "Listen here, Langston," she'd say. "You don't have to sound like anyone else to be worth listening to." He was 10, then skinny, barefoot, still learning that his slow vowels and soft consonants made people laugh when they visited the city. Once, a store clerk in Birmingham had asked him to repeat a sentence just for the amusement of others. He'd done it, cheeks burning. That night, he'd cried quietly in his bed until his mother came in and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son," she whispered, "the way you talk ain't broken. It's born. You carry our stories in every syllable. Don't let the world trade that for shame." Her voice was like honey poured over pain. Slow, soothing, unshakable. That lesson had followed him through every classroom, every boardroom, every headline that called him the man with the southern twang who rebuilt the skies. But behind the headlines was a boy who still remembered standing barefoot in the red dirt, promising himself he'd prove that education and kindness could rise higher than prejudice. Now, sitting in a sleek leather seat above the clouds, Langston smiled faintly. The memory didn't hurt any more, it steadied him. When the seatbelt sign went off, he stood and reached for his bag. A man in a suit blocked his path, fumbling with his luggage. Langston helped lift it down without hesitation. The man blinked in surprise, recognizing him. "Aren't you Dr. Reed?" "The airport guy." Langston chuckled. "That's me. Just a passenger today." The man grinned, shaking his hand warmly. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. Heard a lot about what you're doing with Silverbridge." Emily overheard from 2 rows behind, confusion flickering across her face. She hadn't caught the name before. She didn't know this quiet man she'd mocked was about to walk into a press conference with cameras waiting. Langston thanked the man and stepped out into the cold Denver air. His breath fogged in front of him as he pulled on his gloves. A young driver greeted him by name and opened the door of a black sedan. "Morning, Dr. Reed. Congratulations again." "Sir, big day." "Thank you. Miles, let's get to Silverbridge." The car glided through the city, past snow-dusted trees and low winter light. Langston watched quietly, mind half in the past, half in the weight of the day ahead. He was inheriting a facility on the edge of collapse, financially strained, morally worse, reports of employee harassment, outdated policies, layers of bureaucracy that protected bias rather than progress. He'd taken this challenge not for prestige, but because he remembered what his mother once told him when he got his first engineering job. Don't fix machines if you can fix people on too. The car turned toward the mountains, where Silverbridge Airport rose like a fortress of glass and steel against a backdrop of frozen pines. Reporters gathered near the arrival's entrance. Miles slowed the car. As Langston stepped out, camera flashes broke through the falling snow. Microphones appeared from every direction. "Dr. Reed, how does it feel, taking ownership of Silverbridge? What's your first order of business? Do you plan to address the diversity issues the previous administration ignored?" He smiled politely. "We'll start by listening," he said simply. "Airports are crossroads of the world. It's time ours sounded like one." Inside the terminal, the walls gleamed with polished advertisements, faces of pilots, executives, and travelers, all smiling in glossy perfection. Langston walked through them slowly. the rhythm of his footsteps steady against the echoing announcements. Upstairs, in the executive boardroom, Charles Benton waited, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. Benton represented the old guard, the kind of man who spoke of progress but distrusted change that didn't look like him. He shook Langston's hand with a tight, professional grip. "Welcome, Dr. Reed. We're all eager to see how you plan to turn this place around." "I'm sure we'll manage," Langston replied. His tone carried no edge, just calm certainty. Benton smiled, a little too wide. "I've reviewed your background. Impressive trajectory. From Alabama to MIT to running skyward infrastructure, that's quite a leap." Langston nodded. "Just a lot of hard work and a little faith." Benton leaned back, and an accent that makes investors nervous. Perhaps Langston paused. The room felt still for a moment. Then he smiled again, softer this time. "It's the accent that built my work ethic. Mr. Benton. Wouldn't trade it for anything." Benton chuckled, pretending to admire the answer. But behind that smile, calculation flickered. He already saw Langston as an outsider who needed to be handled. Later that evening, Langston walked alone through the nearly empty concourse. Cleaning crews mopped the floors, and loudspeakers played faint holiday music. He passed a small coffee stand where an older black janitor was sweeping. The man looked up. "Evenin'. Boss." Langston stopped. "How'd you know who I was?" The janitor grinned. "Word travels fast around here. Folks say you're the new owner. About time someone like you runs this place." Langston smiled. "Let's hope I do right by it." "You will," the man said. "You speak like home. Folks listen different when they hear that." Those words hit deep. Langston thanked him, then turned toward the window where planes blinked against the night sky. He could still hear his mother's voice carried on the wind of memory, soft, strong, certain. Before heading to his office, he pulled out his phone and replayed the recording from the flight. Emily's laughter, her mocking tone. It filled the quiet space like a ghost of something old and ugly that still refused to die. He didn't feel anger, just resolve. "This isn't just about one flight," he murmured. "It's about the air we breathe in every corridor." Through the glass, another plane lifted into the dark sky, engines roaring. The reflection of Langston's face merged with it, the faint trace of a smile on his lips. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The next morning began with a brittle kind of silence. Overnight snow had turned the tarmac into a field of white, and the air outside Silverbridge shimmered with thin fog. Langston arrived before dawn, his breath visible in the cold. He wanted to walk the concourse while it was still empty, before the sound of rolling luggage drowned out reflection. Every light flickered across polished floors. Every echo reminded him that an airport was not just a building. It was a living organism built from the moods, tempers, and hopes of thousands. He could feel its pulse. Near the security checkpoint, a maintenance worker greeted him with a nod. "Mornin', Dr. Reed?" "Good morning," he replied, smiling. "Quiet before the storm." "Huh." The man chuckled. "Always. But it's a good kind of quiet. Feels like change." Langston carried that sentence with him as he stepped into the executive elevator. Change. It sounded simple, but it was the hardest thing to build. Upstairs, in a conference room overlooking the snowy runway, a meeting was already underway. Charles Benton stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, his tone brisk. "We need to prioritize image before innovation," he was saying as Langston entered. "The press is watching, and investors want to see immediate returns." Langston placed his folder on the table. Immediate returns come when the people here trust the ground they're standing on. Let's focus on building that first. Benton forced a laugh. Trust doesn't show up on quarterly reports. Dr. Reed. Langston met his eyes, calm but steady. Neither does dignity. But without it, no system lasts. The room fell quiet. For a moment, only the hum of the air conditioning filled the space. Then Benton cleared his throat and changed the subject. After the meeting, Langston returned to his office, a corner room with a wide view of the runway. His assistant handed him a schedule for the week media appearances, staff evaluations, a meeting with flight crews. He paused when he saw the last entry Human Resources Review, Emily Davenport, 2 p.m. He sat down slowly. The recording from the flight still rested in his phone. He hadn't listened again since that night, but he could recall every tone of mockery in her voice. At exactly 2, Emily knocked on his door. Her uniform was crisp, her posture controlled, but her eyes betrayed sleeplessness. "Come in," he said, gesturing to the seat opposite his desk. She hesitated, then spoke quickly. "Dr. Reed, I know why I'm here. I can't take back what I said on that plane. It was ignorant, and it was cruel. I've thought about it every hour since." Langston folded his hands. "I'm not interested in humiliation, Ms. Davenport. I'm interested in honesty. Why did you react that way?" Emily's voice wavered. "I grew up in a world where everyone around me thought certain people just didn't belong in first class or in charge of anything. I guess I believed it without realizing it. When I heard your accent, I made assumptions that say more about me than about you." Langston leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Awareness is a beginning, not an ending. What will you do with it now?" She swallowed hard. "Learn, change. If you'll let me." He nodded. "Then start by helping me fix what allowed this to happen. It's not just about you, it's about a system that teaches bias in silence." Her eyes widened. "You want me to help, yes," he said quietly. "I'd rather see someone grow than disappear." When she left, she felt both heavier and lighter at once, like someone walking out of confession into fresh air. That evening, Langston sat with Captain Andre Wells in the staff lounge. The pilot had requested the meeting privately. "You handled that with grace," Andre said. "Most people in your position would have fired her on the spot." Langston smiled faintly. "That would have been the easy part. But if every wrong voice gets silenced, who's left to learn the right song?" Andre nodded, looking down at his coffee. "You know, I've seen this pattern before. The airline pushes for diversity on posters, but not in practice. They'll watch to see how you handle this. Some won't like that you're not punishing hard enough." "I'm not here to make a spectacle," Langston said. "I'm here to make a difference." Outside, the runway lights blinked like stars pinned to the earth. By the following week, whispers began circulating among staff. Some admired Langston's patience. Others saw it as weakness. Benton was among the latter. In his private office, he spoke to a handful of senior managers. "He's too sentimental," Benton said. "This airport runs on discipline, not redemption. Let him play the saint for a while. It'll make the fall more dramatic." He didn't know that one of the junior analysts in the room was recording the conversation, uneasy about where it might lead. Meanwhile, Emily began her new assignment assisting with an internal audit of passenger relations. She listened to other attendants share stories, small slights, overlooked complaints, the casual jokes people thought harmless. For the first time, she heard her own past words echoed in their confessions. It stung. During lunch in the staff cafeteria, She ran into Captain Wells. He greeted her kindly. "Rough week." "You could say that," she murmured. "I'm realizing how much I didn't see. It's strange. How easy it is to be blind when the world is built to your comfort." Andre smiled. "The trick is not to close your eyes again once you see it." The next morning, Langston met with HR leaders to discuss upcoming reforms. His proposal was bold mandatory cultural empathy training, an open feedback system for employees, and a new mentorship program pairing senior staff with recruits from underrepresented backgrounds. Benton objected immediately. "This will cost millions and invite unnecessary scrutiny." Langston's gaze remained calm. "If equality feels expensive, then inequity has already cost us too much." No one replied. After the meeting, Langston walked through the terminal again. Travelers hurried past. Announcements echoed. Children laughed. The chaos of daily life wrapped around him like music. Yet beneath it, he sensed a quiet tension, the kind that precedes either change or collapse. Later that evening, he stood outside on the observation deck as snow began to fall again. He thought about his mother's porch swing, about her voice reading stories under Alabama stars. "Every storm ends, baby," she used to say. "But it's the wind that shapes the wings." He smiled faintly, whispering the words to the cold air. "Yes, Mama, I'm still flying." Unbeknownst to him, inside the building, Benton was making calls spreading doubt, questioning Langston's decisions, warning investors that the new direction threatened profits. The stage was quietly being set for confrontation. But that night, Langston felt only resolve. He returned to his office, turned off the lights, and watched the runway glow beneath the snowfall. He didn't yet know how deep the resistance ran. He only knew one truth: progress always begins in turbulence. And he was ready to steer through it. The day of the official relaunch of Silverbridge arrived cold and bright. Reporters crowded the terminal, cameras flashing beneath banners that read, "A New Dawn in Aviation." Langston stood before the microphones, the winter sunlight spilling across his tailored coat. Behind him, the newly renovated terminal gleamed with glass walls and the scent of fresh paint. "Today," he began, voice steady but warm, "we're not just rebuilding an airport, we're rebuilding trust. Silverbridge will be a place where every traveler, every worker, every voice finds respect." Applause rippled through the hall. For a moment, even Benton joined in, his smile tight but convincing. To the watching crowd, they looked like partners in progress. Only Langston noticed the flicker of disdain in Benton's eyes, a shadow beneath the applause. After the ceremony, Langston moved through the terminal greeting staff. Travelers stopped him for photos. Children waved. Journalists shouted questions. Amid the noise, he caught sight of Emily standing near a boarding gate. She wore her uniform, but there was a different energy in her stance, humility mixed with focus. He approached her. "How's the new assignment treating you?" She met his eyes. "It's hard, but necessary. Listening to everyone's stories has been like holding up a mirror I never looked into before." Langston nodded. "Good mirrors don't lie. They show what needs changing." Just then, Captain Wells called from behind. "Doctor, read. The press wants a quick word about the diversity program." Langston excused himself with a small nod. As he walked away, Emily watched him, wondering how someone could meet hostility with such quiet conviction. She thought of the look on his face that day on the plane. No anger, only disappointment. That image had followed her through sleepless nights. In the afternoon, Langston met with his executive team to finalize budget allocations for the upcoming quarter. Benton sat opposite him, flipping through papers. "I see you've diverted funds from marketing into staff education," Benton said flatly. "That's correct," Langston replied. "We'll make the best advertisement through integrity." Benton's tone sharpened. "We can't measure integrity in profit margins. Investors expect growth, not social experiments." Langston leaned forward. "Growth means nothing if it's built on silence. We're not running a factory. We're shaping how people treat one another." The air in the room thickened. Benton's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. That evening, Langston walked the concourse again, pausing at a new mural that depicted a diverse group of travelers. Beneath it, the words "Every voice belongs" glowed in soft amber light. A young attendant passed by, whispering to her colleague, "He actually means it, doesn't he?" Langston smiled faintly. Maybe the message was starting to spread. Across the airport, Emily sat in the crew lounge, finishing paperwork. A coworker approached her. "You were on that flight." "Right. The one with Dr. Reed." Emily nodded. "They say he spared your job." Why, she paused, pen hovering. "Because he believes people can change. I didn't, until now." Later that night, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. She had overheard two managers whispering earlier about Benton meeting privately with investors. Something about redirecting funds and reclaiming control. It didn't sound like business as usual. Emily hesitated for hours before deciding to do something she never thought she would. She wrote Langston an email. It was short but direct. "Dr. Reed, there's something happening behind the scenes. I don't have proof yet, but I believe Mr. Benton is undermining the new programs. Please be careful who you trust." She hit send, then closed her laptop with trembling hands. The next morning, Langston read the message while sipping coffee in his office. He wasn't surprised. Benton's resistance had always felt too smooth to be harmless. He forwarded the email to Captain Wells with a brief note. "Let's verify this quietly." By noon, Wells reported back. "There's movement in the accounts. Funds marked for employee development are being funneled into external consultants. No real company behind them." Langston sighed, eyes narrowing. He's building his trap. That afternoon, Benton appeared at his door, all smiles. "Just wanted to congratulate you again on the success of the launch. The board's very pleased." Langston studied him. "I'm glad to hear that. Though I hope the board's also aware that transparency is our new policy." Benton's smile thinned. "Of course." As soon as Benton left, Langston picked up his phone and called Wells. "Gather everything you can on those transactions, discreetly. We'll need evidence, not assumptions, for days." Langston carried on as usual, reviewing safety procedures, visiting terminals, speaking with employees. But beneath the calm routine, the investigation quietly unfolded. Each new document confirmed what Emily had suspected. Meanwhile, she continued working under HR supervision, leading focus sessions about workplace bias. At first, few employees trusted her sincerity. But when she spoke about her own mistake, the humiliation on that flight, people listened. Her vulnerability disarmed them. During one session, a young baggage handler said softly, "I used to think accents meant ignorance too. But hearing you talk about what you did, it made me realize how wrong I was." Emily smiled, humbled. "Then that means the lesson's worth something." As weeks passed, the atmosphere in Silverbridge slowly shifted. Staff began greeting one another differently, warmer, more mindful. The cafeteria chatter no longer divided into cliques. Langston noticed it every time he walked through. Small changes, but real. One night, he stayed late in his office, reviewing numbers. The building was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights his only companion. Suddenly, his computer pinged a message from Wells confirmed Benton's funneling over $2 million into shell firms, sending evidence now. Langston's pulse quickened. He leaned back, staring out at the dark runway beyond the window. The snow had stopped, and the lights stretched like silver veins into the night. He whispered to himself, "Truth has a way of waiting for the right time to land." The next morning, Benton called for a special meeting, citing concerns about leadership direction. He wanted to question Langston's spending and ethics in front of the board. Langston agreed without hesitation. "Let's meet tomorrow," he said. Tone calm. "Morning works for me." When he hung up, he allowed himself a quiet, knowing smile. The turbulence was coming, but this time he intended to steer through it with the same composure that had carried him all his life. Far below, on the main floor, Emily watched him pass through the glass walkway toward his car. He gave her a nod of acknowledgement as he went by. She didn't know what was about to happen, but something in his steady stride told her he was ready. As the doors closed behind him, the loudspeaker announced the final departure of the night. Outside, a plane lifted from the runway, slicing through the dark clouds until its lights became a single distant star. Silverbridge was about to learn that integrity, once airborne, could never be brought down. The following morning broke cold and brittle. Silverbridge's glass walls reflected a pale winter sun, the kind that gave light but no warmth. Inside, tension simmered beneath the hum of morning travelers. Everyone felt it. Something was shifting in the air. Langston arrived early, his breath misting in the frosty wind as he crossed the parking lot. He wore the same calm expression he had carried through every battle in his life. Yet under the surface, his thoughts moved like deep water, slow, steady, calculating. He entered his office to find Captain Wells waiting, a folder tucked beneath his arm. "Morning, Doc," the pilot said quietly. "We've got everything. Transfers, emails, and the shell company records. Benton's hands are all over it." Langston nodded, closing the door. "Good work. Andre, keep the files secure. I'll bring them forward when the time is right." Wells hesitated. "You sure you don't want to confront him now?" Langston smiled faintly. "When the truth lands too soon, it breaks on impact. Let's give it room to fly." He turned to the window, gazing at the busy runway. Snowplows moved slowly in the distance, clearing paths for takeoff. The sight calmed him, the precision, the rhythm, the teamwork. It was how an airport should run. He wanted Silverbridge to mirror that same harmony among its people. At 9 o'clock sharp, Benton called an emergency board meeting. The subject line read, "Financial irregularities and leadership concerns." Langston almost laughed at the irony. He attended without hesitation, briefcase in hand. In the boardroom, Benton sat at the head of the table surrounded by senior executives. His tone was measured, but the glint in his eyes betrayed eagerness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "it's time we discuss the direction this airport is taking. Under Dr. Reed's leadership, we've seen unconventional decisions, funds redirected to social programs, publicity stunts disguised as reform, and now missing money that cannot be accounted for." A murmur rippled through the room. Langston remained silent, letting Benton talk himself into his own corner. Benton spread a stack of printed pages across the table. $2 million, gone from our development budget. No clear explanation. As chair of this board, I move for an internal audit and suspension of executive authority until we clarify these issues. Langston's eyes didn't waver. "Are you finished?" he asked softly. Benton smirked. "For now." Langston opened his briefcase and placed a thin folder on the table. "Then allow me to return the courtesy. This is the full forensic report compiled by our compliance team, verified by the Colorado State Financial Division. It shows where the money went, who signed for it, and whose bank accounts received the transfers." He slid the folder toward Benton. "You'll find your name on every page." The room froze. Benton's smug expression faltered as he flipped through the documents. The color drained from his face. Langston's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I didn't call for this meeting, Charles. You did, but I'm glad you did it. Saves me the trouble." A murmur of shock spread among the members. One woman whispered, "Is this real?" Captain Wells entered then, holding a flash drive. "For those who need confirmation," he said, "these are the recorded emails and transaction trails. I've sent copies to legal and state auditors." Benton's composure cracked. "You can't just— This is outrageous." Langston stood, buttoning his coat. "No, Charles. What's outrageous is using prejudice and greed as business tools. You tried to weaponize integrity, but it doesn't bend for you." The silence that followed was thick and absolute. Finally, one of the directors spoke. "Mr. Benton, I think it's best you step down pending investigation." Benton's mouth opened, then closed again. The battle was over before it began. He rose stiffly and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. When the door closed, Langston looked around the room. Silverbridge deserves better than fear and suspicion. From this moment on, transparency isn't optional. It's our standard. The executives nodded slowly, one by one. After the meeting, Langston walked through the terminal, feeling the shift ripple outward. He knew the news would spread quickly. It always did. But he wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about responsibility. That afternoon, he met Emily in one of the new employee lounges. She had heard the rumors and looked uneasy. "Is it true?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "The truth came out today. Benton's gone." Her eyes widened. "You must feel relieved." Langston smiled faintly. "Relief isn't the goal. Change is—" She hesitated. "Do you ever get tired of being calm, I mean? When people keep testing you?" He considered the question for a moment. "Calm isn't the absence of feeling. It's control of it. My mother used to say, 'Storms don't last longer than patience does.'" She was right. Emily nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You remind me that grace isn't weakness." "That's because it isn't," he said softly. "It's strength that refuses to shout." Over the next few days, the airport settled into an unfamiliar peace. The rumors died down, replaced by quiet admiration. Employees began greeting Langston more openly. He noticed it in the small gestures, the respectful nods, the genuine smiles. Even Benton's supporters started to adapt, realizing resistance had no ground left. One evening, as the last flight of the day departed, Langston and Wells stood near the observation deck. The orange glow of sunset bathed the tarmac. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" Wells asked. "After everything you've done," Langston watched the plane ascend into the fading light. "No. I think about what happens if I stop before it's finished." Wells grinned. "You really don't stop, do you?" Langston shook his head, smiling. "Not when there's still air left to clear." As they walked back toward the terminal, the PA system played a soft instrumental tune, something slow and hopeful. For a fleeting second, Langston imagined his mother's voice among the notes, saying, "You see, baby, you can make people listen without raising your voice." He exhaled, a quiet sigh that carried both exhaustion and gratitude. Down in the main hall, Emily watched from a distance. She saw how passengers greeted Langston, how the staff carried themselves differently now. Respect had become contagious. She whispered to herself, "He didn't just fix the airport. He changed its soul." Outside, the wind swept across the runways, clearing the last traces of snow. Silver Bridge glowed under the night sky, its light steady and bright, a reflection of the man who refused to let darkness dictate the course. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, the storm had passed. And in that fragile calm, something stronger than victory took root: trust. The week after Benton's resignation felt like the calm after a thunderstorm. Silver Bridge breathed easier, its corridors no longer heavy with suspicion. Staff walked a little taller. Smiles lingered longer. The air seemed lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Langston moved through the terminal quietly, observing more than speaking. He liked to see people when they didn't know they were being watched, the small gestures that revealed who they really were. A janitor helping a lost child, a gate agent smiling at an elderly traveler. Those moments told him the airport was healing. At the end of the concourse, Emily stood beside a display board promoting the new voices of the terminal program. Behind her were photographs of employees from every department: mechanics, security staff, attendants, cleaners, each paired with a quote about respect. When Langston approached, she turned and smiled. "We just finished the last set of interviews. It's been incredible, hearing what people carry with them." "Good work," he said. "Stories build bridges faster than rules ever could." She hesitated, glancing at one photo of herself. The caption beneath read, "I used to speak before I listened. Now, I listen first." He saw the quiet shame flicker across her face. "Don't regret that," he told her. "Owning a mistake out loud helps others face their own." Emily nodded, eyes soft. "Sometimes I still hear my old voice in my head and hate it." "Then you're still learning," he replied, "and that's what matters most." Their conversation was interrupted by the crackle of a nearby intercom. "Attention staff. Maintenance alert in Hangar 2. Langston's phone buzzed almost immediately, a message from Andre. "Need you in Hangar 2. You'll want to see this." He excused himself and headed down the side corridor toward the restricted area. The hangar doors loomed open, letting in a burst of cold air and the scent of jet fuel. Inside, Andre stood beside a grounded maintenance jet, clipboard in hand. "What's going on?" Langston asked. Andre handed him the clipboard. "I found this while doing a safety inspection. Some of the older equipment hasn't been serviced in months. Parts were marked as replaced but never were. Looks like Benton's cost-cutting went deeper than we thought." Langston skimmed the report. "Negligence? This bad could have caused an accident." "Exactly," Andre said. "The kind that gets buried in paperwork." Langston closed the folder, jaw tightening. "We'll fix it. Quietly but thoroughly. And I want a full audit of every maintenance contract from the past 2 years. Andre nodded, already on it. As Langston turned to leave, he caught sight of the aircraft's silver fuselage reflecting the snowy light. In the mirror-like surface, he saw his own face calm, yes, but weary. Leadership had its weight. Every truth revealed seemed to uncover another buried deeper. That night, he drove home later than usual. His house overlooked the foothills west of Denver. The city lights shimmered below like a river of fireflies. He stood by the window, holding a cup of tea, and thought of his mother. He could almost hear her voice again, warm and unhurried. "Baby, when you clean a wound, it stings first, but only the pain that faces the air can heal." He smiled faintly. "Still teaching me, Mama," he murmured. The next morning, Langston gathered his department heads for a meeting. "We're reopening the safety files. I know it's tedious, but integrity has no shortcuts." Some groaned quietly, but others nodded with resolve. The new culture he'd been building, one rooted in accountability, was starting to take hold. Meanwhile, Emily was busy organizing the first diversity workshop open to all staff. She had insisted on leading the pilot session herself, nervous but determined. When the day came, she stood in front of 40 employees in a modest conference room. On the whiteboard behind her were the words, "What does respect look like?" Her voice shook at first. "Most of you know who I am," she began. "You've probably heard what I did. I mocked someone's voice because it sounded different from mine. What I didn't know then was that I was mocking something sacred, the story of where he came from." The room was silent. She continued, steadying herself. "If someone had told me that a few words could stain your soul, I might not have believed them, but now I do. And I'm here because someone I wronged gave me a second chance instead of a punishment." When the session ended, the room filled with quiet applause. Several employees stayed to speak with her, sharing their own experiences of judgment and shame. Outside the door, Langston waited, unseen. He listened to her final words through the half-open door. There was sincerity in every syllable. She was learning to use her voice for healing. Later, when they crossed paths near the cafe, she looked surprised. "You were there?" He nodded. "I wanted to hear how the message landed. It landed well." She laughed softly, embarrassed. "Guess I finally said something worth hearing." Langston smiled. "You've always had a voice worth hearing. It just needed truth behind it." In the days that followed, the story of Silverbridge's transformation began to spread beyond Colorado. Local newspapers ran headlines like "From Scandal to Model of Inclusion." Airlines reached out, curious about the new training programs. What had started as a single act of disrespect was becoming a national conversation about dignity in the workplace, but not everyone celebrated. Some of Benton's former allies still whispered in private circles, claiming Langston was turning the airport into a social experiment. One evening, Andre brought him a file, anonymous memo circulating online. "Someone's accusing you of using the reforms to cover up financial mismanagement." Langston read the statement without emotion. "Another lie." "You want me to trace the source?" Andre asked. "No," Langston said calmly. "Let them talk. Noise fades. The truth doesn't." He placed the file aside and looked out his office window where dusk painted the sky in bands of violet and gold. Down below, Emily escorted a group of new recruits across the concourse, explaining the airport's code of conduct. Their laughter drifted upward through the glass, bright and genuine. It sounded like hope. For the first time in months, Langston allowed himself to breathe deeply. The chaos had not broken him. It had refined him. He picked up his mother's photo from the corner of his desk. "We're doing it, Mama," he whispered, "one honest day at a time." Outside, the last flight of the evening roared into the darkening sky. Its engines glowed red against the horizon, carrying with it the promise of something new. Change was no longer an idea at Silverbridge. It was alive, moving, unstoppable. The snow had melted into thin rivers along the runway edges, leaving behind a damp shimmer of winter's retreat. Spring was trying to take hold of Silverbridge, though the air still carried the sharpness of cold mornings. Langston arrived early that day, coffee in hand, reviewing the latest safety audit results as he walked. The numbers were solid. The maintenance issues discovered earlier had been addressed. Staff morale was up, and turnover had dropped by nearly 30%. Yet peace always carried its price, and somewhere beneath the surface, he sensed unrest waiting to stir again. At the terminal cafe, he met with Andro, who had been monitoring internal communications. "There's chatter," Andre said, lowering his voice. "Someone's trying to leak partial data to the press. Anonymous claims that Benton was framed, that you planted those transactions." Langston didn't look up from his cup. "Predictable. You want me to handle it?" "No," Langston replied. "Let them play their hand. The truth always circles back. Andre, it just takes time." Meanwhile, Emily was in the training wing, preparing for the next round of workshops. Her sessions had become popular not because of grand speeches, but because she spoke plainly, with a kind of honesty that disarmed people. That morning, as she arranged chairs in a semicircle, a younger attendant named Zoe approached. "Miss Davenport," she said hesitantly, "I heard what happened to you last year. The way you turned it around, it gives me hope. I've made mistakes too. Not the same, but I used to laugh at passengers who struggled with English. I thought it was harmless." Emily smiled gently. "It's never harmless, Zoe. But realizing that is the start. We can't change what we did, but we can decide who we'll be after." Later that afternoon, she was called to Langston's office. He stood near the window, sunlight falling across his shoulders. "You're making a difference. Emily, people are listening." She laughed softly. "Still feels strange hearing that from you." "Strange or not, it's the truth," he said. Then his tone shifted. "But I need to ask a favor, quietly. Benton's name is circulating again. If anyone from the staff hears rumors, I want you to guide them toward patience, not panic." Emily nodded. "Of course. But what if Benton's not done?" Langston's gaze turned distant. "Then we'll be ready. A lie can only survive in the dark. Eventually, it needs light, and that's when it burns out." That evening, as twilight crept over the city, Emily walked through the nearly empty concourse. She noticed a man standing near the observation windows, collar turned up against the chill. When he turned slightly, she froze. It was Benton. He shouldn't have been there. His access was revoked months ago. "Ms. Davenport," he greeted, voice smooth and unhurried. "You've done well for yourself. Quite the redemption arc." She steadied her voice. "You're trespassing. Mr. Benton, I should call security." He smirked. "Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just came to see what became of my airport." "It was never yours," she said. His smile faded. "You really believe he's some kind of savior, don't you? The noble man fixing a broken world? Don't fool yourself. He plays the same game I did, just with better PR." Emily's hands clenched at her sides. "No. He listens. You never did." He chuckled softly, stepping closer. "Then listen carefully. Ms. Davenport, the board may have cast me out, but there are still people who think like me, people who don't take kindly to men like Reed rewriting the rules. This little paradise he's building, it won't last." Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind only the faint echo of his shoes on the tile. Emily stood frozen for several seconds, then pulled out her phone and called Langston. "He was here," she said quickly. "Benton, he's planning something." There was a pause, then Langston's calm voice. "Thank you. Go home. Emily, I'll handle it." That night, Langston sat alone in his office long after the staff had gone home. Outside, the lights of the runways stretched into the horizon. He thought about Benton's threat not as fear, but as inevitability. Change always triggered resistance. Progress never came quietly. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small silver locket, the one his mother used to wear. Inside was a photo of them on the porch in Alabama, the year before she passed. He traced the outline of her face with his thumb. "Mama," he whispered, "they're still trying to silence the voice you gave me, but I won't stop. At sunrise." He met Andre at the hangar again. The pilot handed him a sealed envelope. "Anonymous source. It came overnight. You'll want to see it." Langston opened it carefully. Inside were printed screenshots, emails between former executives planning to discredit him. At the bottom was a note written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. "They're meeting tonight at the Ridgeview Hotel. Thought you should know. A friend." Andre frowned. "Could be a setup or an opportunity," Langston said. "Either way, we'll go." That evening, the two men arrived at the hotel's rooftop bar, dressed casually. They sat in a quiet corner, watching. Through the reflection of a glass wall, they saw Benton with two businessmen. Laughter carried faintly through the hum of conversation. Langston leaned closer. "He's trying to sell access, probably spinning the story that I manipulated the board." Andre nodded. "You want me to confront him?" "No," Langston said softly. "Let him talk. I'd rather have his words than his silence. It's easier to fight noise." They left quietly after recording enough of the conversation to confirm their suspicions. Back at Silverbridge, Langston filed the evidence with legal counsel and prepared a formal complaint. But before signing it, he paused, staring out the window at the darkened terminal. He didn't feel anger, only fatigue and clarity. "Every time we pull the weeds," he murmured, "more truth grows in their place." The next morning, Emily found him in the Concourse Cafe, looking out at the plains. "You didn't sleep," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "Airports don't sleep, and neither do those who care for them." She sat across from him. "Do you ever wish you'd chosen something easier?" Langston took a long breath, eyes fixed on a departing jet. "No. The harder the road, the clearer the destination. I'd rather build one honest bridge than walk 1,000 easy lies." Emily looked at him with quiet admiration. "You know, when you talk like that, you sound like your mother's still standing beside you." "She is," he said softly. Every day, outside, sunlight spilled across the glass walls, bright and sharp. Silverbridge shone like a promise fulfilled. But somewhere beyond that light, in the unseen corners of the city, Benton was not done. His pride would not rest. The story was far from over. By early summer, Silverbridge had found its rhythm again. The snow had vanished, replaced by warm light that filled the terminal's glass corridors. Music played softly through the speakers, an instrumental piece that made travelers pause for a breath instead of rushing through. Langston stood on the upper balcony overlooking the main concourse. From up there, he could see the pulse of the airport families embracing, pilots greeting crew members, attendants laughing near the gates. It was everything he'd hoped for, a place that reflected unity rather than division. But peace, he'd learned, was the most fragile currency. Captain Andre Wells approached, phone in hand. His face was set in that half-serious, half-worried expression Langston had come to recognize. "We've got movement," he said quietly. "The media just ran a story. Someone leaked doctored files, claims that you diverted funds for personal gain." Langston's brow furrowed. But his voice remained even. "They're fabrications." Andre nodded. "Completely. But they look real enough to stir trouble." Langston exhaled slowly. "Then trouble will come. Let it, within hours." Headlines began spreading online. Airport CEO under investigation for misuse of funds. Reporters swarmed Silverbridge like gulls in a storm. Questions echoed through the terminal. Some employees looked uneasy, others defended him outright. Emily found him in his office, surrounded by flashing phones and unanswered calls. "You should release a statement," she urged. "Not yet," he said, eyes steady on the window. "Truth walks slower than lies, but it always arrives." Her voice softened. "People believe in you, Dr. Reed, but they need to hear from you." Langston looked at her, then calm, but weary. "Emily, when someone throws mud, the worst thing you can do is start wrestling in it. I'll speak when the noise fades enough for words to matter." That night, after the last flight departed, the airport fell silent. Langston walked the empty concourse alone. Neon lights reflected off the polished floors, painting faint halos beneath his steps. He paused before the mural that read, "Every voice belongs." He whispered to himself, "Even when that voice is trembling." The next morning, a hearing was announced by the Interim Oversight Board, a group hastily assembled to investigate the allegations. Benton's name wasn't mentioned, but Langston knew the fingerprints were his. Emily approached him in the hallway before the session. "Do you think he'll come back this time?" Langston nodded once. He never left. Men like Benton don't fight for truth. They fight to stay relevant. The board convened in the conference hall. Cameras lined the walls, flashing incessantly. Reporters filled the back rows. Langston entered alone. Coat neatly pressed, face unreadable. The lead investigator, a woman named Carla Ortiz, began. "Dr. Reed, the inquiry concerns the transfer of funds from Silverbridge's development budget to a private consultancy. We'd like your account." Langston folded his hands on the table. "Those transfers were authorized by my predecessor. I redirected funds only to restore safety compliance and equity programs. I'll provide full documentation." Carla nodded. "We'll need to verify those claims. Do you deny any personal benefit?" He met her gaze directly. "I've spent my life building what others tried to break. I don't take from the work. I build it." The cameras clicked furiously. Across the room, someone rose from the back. Charles Benton, dressed impeccably, as though nothing had ever fallen apart. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Madam Chair, I have evidence that may contradict Dr. Reed's statement." A murmur swept through the crowd. Benton smiled faintly, holding up a flash drive. "This contains records of transfers traced directly to an account under Dr. Reed's name." Langston remained seated, hands steady. "Go ahead," he said quietly. Carla inserted the drive into the projection system. Figures and charts appeared on the screen, amounts, dates, and an account number that indeed bore Langston's initials. For the first time, whispers turned sharp. Langston waited until the presentation ended, then stood slowly. "May I?" he asked, stepping toward the projector. Carla nodded. Langston pointed to the lower corner of the screen. "You'll notice a pattern. Each timestamp matches the same 3-minute window. Precisely 2:37 May, on 3 consecutive days. I don't work at 2:37 but I know someone who does." He turned to the room. "Captain Wells, please bring in our IT director." The door opened, and a young technician entered, nervous but determined. He carried a folder of printed logs. "These are system access records from that week," he said. The account was cloned using stolen credentials from Dr. Reed's previous assistant. The Origin A private server linked to Mr. Benton's consulting firm. Gas rippled across the hall. Benton's face turned pale. Langston's tone never rose. Mr. Benton, I told you truth travels slower than lies, but it never loses direction. Security officers moved toward Benton as he stammered. This is absurd. You can't prove. The technician interrupted. We can. Metadata and IP addresses don't lie. By the end of the session, Benton was escorted out under formal investigation for fraud and defamation. The reporters surged forward, firing questions. Langston raised a hand gently. This isn't a victory, he said. It's a reminder. The cost of integrity is constant vigilance. Outside, the sky had darkened with an approaching storm. Thunder rolled faintly across the horizon. Emily waited near the gate as Langston emerged. You could have destroyed him months ago, she said. Why wait? He gave a small, tired smile. Because some lessons only matter when everyone's watching. They stood in silence for a moment, the rain beginning to fall against the glass. Then Langston added softly, when you teach people what justice looks like, you have to let them see it unfold. That night, Silverbridge made national headlines again, but this time, the narrative was different. Airport CEO vindicated after fraud. Plot exposed. Messages of support flooded in. Airline staff posted photos with the mural under the hashtag Game Every Voice Belongs. The world was watching. And for once, it was seeing more than scandal. It was witnessing redemption. Langston didn't read the articles. Instead, he drove home, parked by the quiet hills, and sat under the soft drumming of rain on the windshield. He thought about his mother again, about how she taught him to fight without hatred, to stand without shouting. He whispered into the night, "We did it. Mama, not just for me, but for everyone who was ever told their voice didn't belong." The storm outside roared louder, but inside, he felt peace. For the first time in a long while, the sky trembled, and it wasn't fear. It was release. The morning after Benton's public downfall, Silverbridge woke to a strange quiet. It wasn't the silence of fear, but of collective breath, the kind held between disbelief and relief. Newspapers lay stacked at the coffee stands, every front page carrying the same image: Dr. Langston Reed standing calmly before flashing cameras, his face a symbol of resilience. "In the Terminal Cafe?" Emily flipped through one of those papers. The headline read, "Truth Takes Flight. CEO Exonerated." She smiled faintly, pride mixing with awe. "He did it," she whispered. Across the concourse, Langston was already at work. He had arrived before dawn, his mind too alert for sleep. Though cleared of wrongdoing, he felt no triumph, only a quiet responsibility. He knew victory was a fleeting thing, but integrity had to be tended every day, like a fragile flame in the wind. Captain Wells entered his office holding 2 cups of coffee. "Morning, Doc," he said. "You look like a man who didn't go home." Langston smiled. "Sleep can wait. Rebuilding trust can't." Andre handed him one of the cups. "The staff's buzzing. They're proud of you. Feels like the whole airport's walking taller today." Langston looked out the window toward the runways glinting under the pale sunrise. "Good. They earned it. This place isn't built on glass and steel. It's built on people believing in each other again." Andre nodded, then added, "You know, not everyone would have handled it like you did. Most folks would have buried Benton the first chance they got." Langston's tone was soft. Benton buried himself. All I did was let the light in. Later that morning, he walked through the terminal, shaking hands with employees who stopped to thank him. A young janitor said. "You made us proud, sir." A flight attendant added. "We knew you'd clear your name." He smiled at each of them, but said little. Praise, he believed, was best received quietly. When he reached the far wing of the terminal, he found Emily leading a group of trainees. Her energy filled the space confident, open, sincere. She caught sight of him and motioned for a pause. "Everyone," she said, "this is the man who reminds us that leadership isn't about power, it's about patience." Langston raised a hand, chuckling softly. "You're making me sound much wiser than I am." One of the trainees asked, "Sir, what kept you calm through all that?" He thought for a moment before answering. "When people doubt you for how you sound, where you come from, or what you believe, you can't shout louder, you have to stand stiller. Sooner or later, the noise wears itself out." The room fell silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Then the young attendant nodded. "I think I understand now." After the session, as the group dispersed, Emily approached him. "You just turned a training break into a master class." Langston smiled. "You've turned your own shame into purpose. We're both teaching in our own ways." She hesitated before asking, "Do you ever miss the quiet life before all this?" He looked out at the bustling concourse, travelers rushing toward their gates. "No," he said after a pause, "because every time someone here learns to see beyond difference, I feel like I'm home." That afternoon, Langston attended a meeting with the Regional Transport Authority. They wanted to expand Silverbridge's reach, new terminals, new routes, international partnerships. But he had only one concern, preserving its soul. "We'll grow," he told them, "but not at the expense of what we've built. Silverbridge isn't just a port of travel, it's a statement. Every plane that lands here should feel like it touched ground on fairness itself." The officials exchanged glances. Then one smiled. "That's a tall order. Dr. Reed?" Langston replied calmly. "So is flight. But we manage that, too." When the meeting ended, he drove to the outskirts of Denver, where his mother's small home still stood, untouched. The wooden porch creaked beneath his shoes, just like it had when he was a boy. The air smelled of pine and memory. He sat on the swing where she used to read aloud and pulled out her old locket, the silver catching the afternoon light. "You'd laugh at how far we've come." "Mama," he whispered, "they mocked my voice once, said it sounded too slow, too southern, too black for their world. But now they call it steady. Isn't that something a breeze passed through the trees, stirring the wind chimes she had hung decades ago? Their sound was soft, familiar like her laughter echoing from the porch steps." When he returned to Silverbridge that evening, he found Emily waiting by his office. "There's something you need to see," she said, holding out her tablet. He glanced at the screen. A viral post was spreading across social media, a video clip from the hearing, showing Benton's lies unraveling and Langston's calm defense. The caption read, "Dignity doesn't shout, it stands." Hundreds of thousands of comments flooded beneath it. "This man just restored my faith in leadership. His accent carries wisdom, not weakness. He's what America needs more of." Langston set the tablet down gently. "The internet's a strange thing," he said. "It forgets fast." "Maybe," Emily replied. "But not this time. They're not seeing just a CEO. They're seeing what grace looks like under pressure." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out over the terminal again, the mosaic of faces, voices, accents, stories. For the first time, he felt that Silverbridge wasn't merely his responsibility anymore. It belonged to everyone who walked through it. The next day, the mayor of Denver visited the airport to announce a new community scholarship program in Langston's name, funded by local donors inspired by his story. The scholarships would support young aviation engineers and service professionals from underrepresented communities. Langston stood at the podium and spoke quietly. If my mother were alive today, she'd remind us that flight isn't just about wings. It's about permission to rise. Let's make sure no one ever has to ask for it again. Applause thundered across the atrium. That evening, when the crowd dispersed, he stood alone by the giant window wall overlooking the airfield. The sky was painted in gold and lavender. Planes took off one after another, their engines roaring like heartbeats. Emily joined him, her reflection beside his in the glass. "You changed more than this airport," she said softly. "You changed us." Langston smiled faintly. "I didn't change you. You changed because you listened." She tilted her head. "And you, what changed you?" He paused, watching a plane disappear into the clouds. "Everything that tried to break me," he said. "Turns out, pressure just teaches steel how to hold." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the airport lights flickered on rows upon rows of tiny beacons guiding arrivals home. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the world continued around them, steady and alive. And for Langston Reed, the weight of the sky no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. The next weeks unfolded like sunlight through thinning clouds, steady, golden, alive. Silverbridge hummed again, not with chaos, but with purpose. People moved differently now. Greetings carried warmth instead of obligation. Posters of the airport's new slogan, "Respect takes flight," hung near every gate. Travelers paused to read them, some even taking pictures as if the words themselves felt revolutionary. Langston walked through the terminal on a Monday morning, his pace unhurried. Every few steps, someone stopped him to say thank you. A baggage handler shook his hand. A mechanic patted his shoulder. A grandmother traveling home to Houston told him, "I've been flying 40 years. Son, and this place, it feels different, kinder." He smiled, deeply moved. That's the goal, ma'am, to make kindness our default altitude. In the staff lounge, Emily stood before a whiteboard filled with ideas. Her hair was tied back, sleeves rolled up. "All right, team," she said. "We've tackled language training and mentorship. Now we move to empathy workshop sessions where crew and passengers share experiences directly. Real stories, real voices." A flight attendant raised a hand. "Won't that be awkward? People don't usually open up like that." Emily smiled knowingly. "They will when they feel seen. That's what Dr. Reed taught me. You can't ask for trust. You earn it by listening." Langston happened to walk in at that moment, catching her words, and by showing up, he added, smiling. Every day, the group clapped softly, and Emily chuckled. "Perfect timing. Sir, you just volunteered to open the first session." He laughed. "I see what you did there." Later that afternoon, Langston stood before the assembled employees in the main conference room. "I've heard hundreds of business presentations," he began, "but very few honest conversations. Today, we start something new. Not a program, a practice." He paused, looking around the room. The heart of this airport isn't concrete or machinery. It's people. You're the landing gear that absorbs the weight when life hits hard. You're the voice passengers remember long after they've gone. You matter. There was quiet, then applause not loud, but heartfelt. Afterward, Emily found him in the hallway. "You keep doing that," she said, "doing what making people feel like they belong in a story bigger than themselves." He smiled. "Because they do. Meanwhile, far from Silverbridge, Charles Benton sat in a dim bar outside Chicago, the glow of a muted TV reflecting off his glass. On screen, a news segment replayed Langston's speech. Benton's face tightened as the applause echoed faintly from the speakers. He muttered to himself, "The man turned a scandal into sainthood." The bartender, uninterested, wiped the counter. "You know him or something?" Benton forced a smile. "Used to." Then, lowering his voice, "But I'll know him again." Back in Colorado, the next morning brought good news. Langston received an invitation from the Federal Aviation Commission to speak at their national summit on workplace reform in the airline industry. It was an opportunity to take Silverbridge's message beyond its walls. Andre found him reviewing the letter. "You'll go?" "Right." Langston nodded slowly. "If it helps others build what we've built here, then yes." Emily grinned. "You realize that makes you a national example now." He chuckled softly. "I'll settle for being a local reminder." The summit came a week later, held in Washington, D.C. Langston's speech drew executives, journalists, and policymakers alike. His words carried the same quiet strength he'd shown since the first day he took control of Silverbridge. "When you run an airport," he told the crowd, "you learn that everyone arrives with baggage, some visible, some hidden. But if you treat every traveler as a story instead of a statistic, you'll find compassion checks in before judgment ever boards." The audience rose to their feet, applauding until he stepped off the stage. That night, he returned to his hotel room overlooking the city lights. He called Andre. "It's done." They listened. "Of course they did," Andre replied. "The whole country's finally catching up to what you've been saying all along." Langston smiled quietly. "It's not about me. It's about what we can become if we stop mistaking difference for distance." The following day, he flew back home. As the plane descended, the familiar sprawl of Colorado came into view, the mountains like ancient guardians under a morning sky. The moment the wheels touched the runway, the passengers clapped, and Langston felt something swell in his chest. Silverbridge was waiting for him. When he stepped off the plane, Emily and several staff members stood by the gate, cheering lightly. Someone held up a sign that read, "Welcome home, Captain of Hearts." He laughed, shaking his head. "That's embarrassing." Emily grinned. "You earned it." Later that evening, as twilight descended, Langston and Andre sat near the observation deck watching planes take off. The golden light reflected off their faces. "You know," Andre said, "you've turned this place into more than an airport. It's a kind of sermon in motion." Langston chuckled. "I didn't mean to preach." "You didn't," Andre said. "You just lived loud enough that people started to listen." As they sat in companionable silence, Emily joined them, holding 3 cups of coffee. "For late-night philosophers," she said playfully. Langston accepted his cup. "You know, Emily, this view reminds me of something my mother used to say. Every time a plane lifts off, it's proof we can defy the weight meant to hold us down." Emily looked out at the glowing runway. She was right. You defied more than gravity. Dr. Reed, you defied doubt. He smiled faintly. Doubt was just another kind of weather. You fly through it long enough, and the sky clears. A jet soared overhead, its engines rumbling like thunder fading into the stars. They watched until its lights became a speck of gold swallowed by distance. Langston took a long breath, feeling the peace that came from purpose fulfilled. "You know," he said softly, "every day I think about that day on the flight, how a single moment of disrespect could have stayed just that, But it became something greater because someone chose to see, to change. Emily met his gaze. Because you chose to forgive. He nodded. Forgiveness is the only thing that makes change stick. They sat quietly as the lights of Silverbridge shimmered below them. The night felt endless, the air still but full of meaning. And for the first time in years, Langston felt entirely at home, not in a house, not in an office, but in the space between earth and sky, where kindness had finally learned to fly. Summer deepened over the Rockies, and with it came a new rhythm at Silverbridge. The airport was no longer just a travel hub. It had become a living symbol of reform. Passengers wrote letters praising the kindness of the staff. Airlines requested training partnerships, and journalists began referring to Silverbridge as the airport that healed itself. Langston walked the concourse early one morning, the light of dawn pouring through the high windows, the sound of rolling luggage, quiet laughter, and intercom chimes formed a kind of human symphony. It reminded him of something his mother once said: "The world only sounds harsh when people forget to listen for harmony." He stopped by the observation deck, watching a small jet rise against the horizon. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Emily, holding a folder pressed to her chest. "Morning, Dr. Reed," she said, her smile bright but hesitant. "I've been working on something I'd like you to see." She opened the folder and handed him several pages of proposal titled The Bridge Initiative. It outlined plans for an international training exchange where airport staff from different countries could visit Silverbridge to learn its empathy-based model. Langston read quietly, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "This is ambitious," he said finally, "and exactly the kind of risk that matters." Emily exhaled, relieved. "I wasn't sure you'd approve." "Why not?" She smiled faintly. "Because it's the kind of dream that sounds impossible until someone like you believes in it." He looked up at her, warmth in his expression, then considerate, believed in. While they spoke of hope, a shadow gathered elsewhere. In a quiet Denver office, Charles Benton met with two men in suits, consultants who once worked for him, now drawn back by the scent of bitterness. "The man's untouchable now," one said. "You'll ruin yourself trying to bring him down again." Benton's eyes were cold. "He embarrassed me on every screen in the country. I won't rest until his halo cracks." He opened a folder showing private emails, bank transactions, and a list of investors. "If I can't discredit him, I'll drown him in the very success he built." Back at Silverbridge, the day moved on with ordinary beauty. Travelers rushed, babies cried, laughter filled waiting lounges. To Langston, that noise was proof of life, imperfect but alive. That afternoon, Andre entered his office holding an envelope. "Mail from D.C., he said. "They're awarding you the Aviation Leadership Medal next month." Langston chuckled softly. A medal for doing what should have been normal all along. Andre grinned. "Normal doesn't make headlines." "My friend, change does." When the ceremony day arrived, the entire Silverbridge team gathered in the terminal's main hall to watch the live stream. Emily stood near the front, her hands clasped. As Langston walked onto the stage in Washington, the applause was thunderous. He spoke simply, "I didn't set out to make headlines. I set out to make people feel human again. Airports remind us that everyone's going somewhere, but before we take flight, we should remember where we stand on shared ground." The audience rose to their feet. Emily wiped her eyes. Even Andre, stoic as always, smiled proudly. But behind the celebration, Benton's plan was already in motion. Through a shell foundation, he had begun channeling anonymous funds into Silverbridge's accounts, intending to later accuse Langston of laundering money through fake donors. It was subtle, cruel, and designed to mimic generosity. 2 weeks later, an auditor noticed discrepancies. "Dr. Reed," she said nervously during their meeting, "there's been a sudden influx of external funds, millions. They're marked as private donations, but the sources are unverified." Langston frowned. "We didn't authorize any open funding campaign." She shook her head. "Then someone did it in your name." Emily, sitting across from him, felt her stomach twist. Could it be Benton Langston exhaled slowly? Probably. But we won't accuse without proof. That's how chaos wins. He turned to Andre. "Quietly track where it came from. Every wire, every name. I want truth before noise." Days passed under a cloud of unease. Whispers spread again, subtle, poisonous. Some journalists hinted at financial irregularities. Staff members grew anxious, fearing another storm. Emily found Langston late one night in his office, still in his suit, papers spread across his desk. "You should rest," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Her rest isn't an option when the air gets thin." She stepped closer. "You can't carry all this alone." Langston looked up at her, eyes tired but kind. "I'm not alone. Emily, I've got people who remember why we started. That's more than most leaders ever get." Andre arrived just before midnight with a laptop. "Got it," he said. "The transfers originated from an offshore account linked to Benton's old company. He's trying to make it look like you used ghost donors to fund the bridge initiative." Langston nodded slowly, then leaned back in his chair. "He's not just after me. He's trying to destroy faith itself, the belief that this place stands for something clean." Emily clenched her fists. "Then let's expose him, this time publicly." Langston shook his head. "No, not yet. If we strike too soon, it'll look like retaliation. We need him to reveal his hand first." He looked out the window, where the runway lights blinked like silent sentinels. "He wants a spectacle. I'll give him silence. It'll scare him more." For days, Benton waited for the trap to spring, for headlines to bloom with scandal. But nothing came. Silverbridge remained quiet, calm, untouched. That silence unnerved him. He called his contacts, demanded updates, nothing. Then, one morning, his phone buzzed. A headline appeared. "FBI investigates former board member in cyber fraud case." His own face filled the screen. He froze. Beneath the headline were the words "Evidence provided by Silverbridge Infrastructure Group." Benton sank into his chair, realization dawning too late. The same patience that had once humiliated him had undone him again. Back in Colorado, Langston stood in front of the terminal mural with Emily and Andre. The news had already reached the staff. Cheers erupted in the concourse. But Langston only smiled softly. Emily said, "You could have gloated." He shook his head. "No. Justice isn't about celebration, it's about closure." Andre chuckled. "You're too good for this world." "Doc," Langston smiled. "Just trying to be good enough for the one we've got." He looked out toward the horizon, where planes rose one after another, leaving trails across the blue. "Every flight," he said quietly, "is a promise that even gravity can't keep us down forever. People like Benton forget that, but I never will." The sun spilled across the glass, golden and forgiving. Silverbridge shone like it had been reborn. For the first time, Langston felt something rare and whole, a peace not born of victory, but of knowing that what he stood for had endured every test. He closed his eyes briefly and heard his mother's voice again. soft as ever. Keep your wings clean. Son. The sky remembers. He smiled. Yes. Mama! It always does. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the mountains around Silverbridge in gold and copper. The air carried that faint crispness of change, the kind that reminded people of endings, but also beginnings. Inside the terminal, travelers bustled through morning light. Their reflections shimmered across glass walls etched with the airport's new motto, "Integrity elevates all." Langston stood near the main atrium, watching as the first plane of the day took off. It wasn't the roar of engines that stirred him, it was the knowledge of how far this place had come, from scandal and division to a sanctuary of respect. Silverbridge had become something greater than even he imagined. Behind him, footsteps approached. "You've been staring at that runway for 10 minutes, said a familiar voice. Emily stood there with 2 cups of coffee, smiling. He accepted one with gratitude. "I was just thinking," he said softly, "about how this place almost broke, but somehow it learned to fly again." Emily nodded. "You rebuilt it not just with rules, but with heart." Langston took a slow sip, then smiled faintly. "Heart's the only material strong enough to survive turbulence." She laughed. "You always sound like you're narrating a sermon." He grinned. "Maybe I just learned to speak from people who prayed through pain." Before she could reply, Andre appeared, waving a folder. "Good morning, preachers. You'll want to see this." Inside were pages of data, employee satisfaction up 42%, public trust index climbing, and a list of new global partners signing on to the Bridge Initiative. Langston looked through the report, pride flickering quietly in his eyes. "This isn't just numbers," he said. "It's proof that compassion scales." Andre chuckled. "You really can make kindness sound like a business strategy." "Because it is one," Langston replied, "the kind that never goes bankrupt." A week later, Silverbridge hosted its first international summit on empathy in aviation. Delegates from around the world arrived: airport directors, flight crews, policy advisors, all eager to learn how this once troubled airport had transformed. Emily led the opening session, her voice steady and clear. "We used to think efficiency meant moving faster," she said. "Now we know it means moving together." Applause rippled across the auditorium. Langston, seated in the front row, felt a quiet swell of pride, not for himself, but for the woman who had once mocked a stranger's voice and now spoke like she was healing the world, one truth at a time. Afterward, he joined her backstage. "You were remarkable," he said. She smiled modestly. "Just following your example." "No," he corrected gently. "You're following your own." That evening, the 3 of them, Langston, Emily, and Andre, walked the length of the terminal together. Outside, the sky blazed with orange light, planes taking off one after another. Andre said, "You ever think about what's next?" "Doc, you've done what most people only talk about, turned a symbol of inequality into a global blueprint." Langston chuckled softly. "Next. Maybe I'll finally take that vacation I've been promising myself." Emily grinned. "You on vacation? You'd end up giving lectures to the cabin crew halfway through the flight." He laughed, shaking his head. "Maybe. But I think it's time to let this place breathe without me hovering." Andre frowned. "You're not thinking of stepping down, are you?" Langston didn't answer right away. He looked through the glass at the sunset painting the horizon. "One day," he said finally, "leaders have to know when to land. This place isn't mine to keep, it's theirs to grow." Emily was quiet for a moment. "You've built something worth protecting, but you've also built people who will protect it for you." Her words stayed with him long after they parted ways. The next morning, Langston drove out early, past the city and into the hills where his mother's old home still stood. The wooden porch sagged a little more each year, but it felt unchanged, the same wind, the same trees whispering through memory. He sat on the steps with a cup of coffee, watching dawn break. The silence was deep, but it wasn't empty. He could almost hear her voice again. "Don't chase the world, baby. Just make the ground you walk on kinder." He smiled softly. "I think I did, Mama. Or at least I tried." A week later, Langston gathered his senior team in the boardroom. The mood was warm, anticipatory. He looked around the table, faces he trusted, people who had become family. "It's time," he began. "I've decided to step down as CEO by year's end." Gas filled the room. Emily blinked, stunned. "You can't just leave." "I'm not leaving," he said gently. "I'm passing the torch. Every structure I've built here was meant to outlive me." Andre leaned forward. "Who'll take over?" Langston looked directly at Emily. "Someone who's already been doing the work." Her eyes widened. "Me." He nodded. "You've lived this change from the inside out. You turned guilt into growth. You gave people their voice back. That's leadership." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Then just promise me one thing," he said. "Keep listening." The room fell silent, the moment settling like sunlight through glass. When winter arrived, the transition became official. On the final day of his tenure, the entire terminal gathered in applause as Langston stood one last time at the podium. He spoke softly but firmly. "When I came here, this airport was broken not by systems, but by silence. We fixed it, not by shouting louder, but by hearing deeper. And now, it's time for a new voice to guide it forward." He turned to Emily, the voice of someone who understands that humility can heal more than authority ever will. She stepped forward, tears in her eyes, and the crowd erupted. Later, as Langston walked the runway one final time, Andre joined him, hands in his pockets. "So what?" Now he asked. Langston smiled. "Now, I go home. Maybe I'll finally finish that book my mother wanted me to write." "What'll you call it?" Andre asked. Langston looked toward the rising sun, where a plane cut through the clouds, the ground beneath wings. Andre grinned, fitting. Langston's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Because flight isn't about escaping gravity," he said softly. "It's about trusting the air to hold you when you rise." As another aircraft lifted gracefully into the morning sky, Langston felt something inside him settle like peace finding its final place to rest. He took one last look at Silverbridge, his heart full. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and that was enough. He whispered, "Mama, we made it." Then he turned toward the sunlight, where every ending looked like the beginning of flight. Dr. Langston Reid's story reminds us that real power doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from how we choose to respond when others test our grace. The world often confuses calm with weakness and humility with surrender. But true strength lies in refusing to let bitterness rewrite who we are. Langston didn't fight disrespect with fury. He taught that dignity can disarm cruelty, and patience can expose truth far better than pride ever will. In every encounter, we have a choice to mirror hate or to model something higher. For older generations who have lived through decades of change, this message rings especially deep. The legacy we leave isn't measured by how loud we spoke, but by how many hearts we lifted. Respect, kindness, and understanding are timeless virtues, ones that bridge generations, cultures, and colors. When we act with empathy, we remind the world that humanity is still its greatest strength. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If Dr. Reed's story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet power inside compassion, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Heart Stories. Your support helps us bring more tales of courage, hope, and justice to light. Together, let's keep spreading the message that respect is the true language of humanity. We'll see you in the next story, where every voice, every heart, and every act of kindness still matters.